Dr. Alice has a compelling evidence, and she's a professor out of Colorado. She has compelling evidence that Chad really is Noah's home, and that Ararat is mistranslated, and it could easily be a couple different mountains potentially in Africa that Noah's Ark landed in.
What does it change?
What it changes is our perspective, right? It changes because you mentioned earlier. You said, "I think something major is going to happen in Africa," and I was like, "Wait, what?" Before I shared with you that I think that it's quite possible that Chad is Noah's home. I think that the ancient Ethiopians and ancient Sudanese, land of Kush, Kushites, they discuss about there's even the Egyptians talk about this. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Egyptians know that they're refugees. Are you aware of that?
No.
Yeah, the Egyptians believe that they're refugees from a previous time.
What does it mean?
Yeah, I'll get into that in a second. But they have a saying. Each culture has a saying that something is super, super old, right? They'll say this is as old as, like in America, we say something is as old as dirt, right?
Yes.
They each have old statements that this is as old as when the river was diverted. Well, I think that the Nile didn't necessarily always flow north. And I'm one of those weirdos where in studying Moses, I think that what Moses had access to, he had access to the trade routes, which would have been the river routes. And I think the Sahara was green a lot later than what we're thinking it is. I think a lot of the Sahara was Eden. And I'm weird when I think that, because most people won't discuss that.
Eden.
Eden, yeah. I think Eden went from Chad all the way to and through the Tigris, all the way through Iran. I think Eden was massive. Okay, and this gets back to, remember how I introduced the concept that there's water below what we think it is? I think the spring that fed the four rivers could have easily been from below what we understand to be the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Gihon, and the Pishon. I think one spring, fresh water, could have fed all of them. I have the largest freshwater aquifer in the world. It's underneath Libya, Egypt, Sudan, and Chad.
Africa.
Yeah. The largest freshwater aquifer, it's all ancient, is under there.
So to me, Africa is just like we discussed earlier. So 5% of the ocean is only known to human beings.
Yeah.
So to me, Africa is just like the ocean.
Well, the Sahara certainly is, yeah. I mean, when I say that Ethiopia, Egypt, Sudan, all have beliefs that when they say something is old, right? I'm old. You're as old as when they diverted the river. I went to Sudan because I wanted to see it myself. And it certainly appears that they diverted the river at the Sixth Cataract. And a cataract is where, when you go upriver on the Nile, this is the only time in the world. Think about God's creation. If he does something once, or something only happens once, you should pay attention to it. A cataract is where the Nile flows north. It's the only river in the world that flows north. That's it. So we should pay attention to that. Everything else, when you are going down river, which means south, or I'm sorry, upriver means south, right? A cataract means you've got to get out with your boat and get back in, because there's like a falls. Does that make sense? There's rocks or whatever else. You can't just go. It's it's the Sixth Cataract. Okay, and if you look at the Sixth Cataract, it appears that the river was diverted. Now, I think that it's quite possible, and ironically, Dr. Alice is with me on this, that it's quite possible that that's where the river was diverted by Noah after the flood.
What do you think of Antarctica?
Oh, and by the way, before we get to Antarctica, by the way, I figure if we did it, we may as well chat about this, right? You asked, what do I think is happening with the Ark of the Covenant? And we have evidence that good King Josiah, I think it's 630 BC, or 610, is asking Pharaoh Necho why he's passing through his land, to go meet the Assyrian king in the plains of Megiddo, which should make your hair stand up, because Megiddo means Armageddon. So Necho is meeting the Assyrian king at Armageddon, and good
Yeah,
king.
Armageddon is a place on it's a place, right?
It's a plain. I've been there. Yeah, it's a plain in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and King Josiah asks Necho, "Why are you coming against me?" And Pharaoh Necho very clearly says, "Because Yahweh told me to." Now, I've got a question for you. How is Yahweh telling him to do this unless he has access to an ephod and a priest? There's no way Yahweh is speaking to Pharaoh Necho. Yahweh speaks to Josiah, the king of Israel, who would have had the Ark of the Covenant and the priest with the ephod. But instead, I've got Josiah, who's being told by Necho that he's got to stand aside because Necho is being told to go to Megiddo. That to me tells me something's going on in Egypt. And where does Jeremiah go when Babylon conquers Israel? Jeremiah goes to Egypt. Where does Jeremiah, the scribe, write his stuff? From Egypt. Now, what else do I have in Egypt? On Elephantine Island in Egypt, we know that the Jews had sacrifice on that island, I think up from, I believe it's late 500s to 300s BC. We know they were sacrificing on Elephantine Island. Elephantine Island is south in Egypt, upriver on the Nile. You with me?
Mm-hmm.
That to me I find strange. So we go, Cyrus takes over for the king at the time. Belshazzar was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was off in the desert of what is northern Saudi Arabia, worshiping the god of Narum Sin, which was the moon god, if I'm not mistaken, off the time. And he was not a popular person because they were worshiping Marduk at that time. And he's mentioned every time that he didn't come and grasp the hands of Marduk every year, and they're very disappointed. And Nebuchadnezzar is considered one of the first archaeologists. Now, why he's worshiping the moon god, I'm not exactly certain, but I do find it fascinating that he's out in the middle of the desert instead of ruling over Babylon. Okay, Cyrus comes in and takes over, frees the Jews. Says, go ahead, go back. It's been 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
Cyrus rules for a period of time, then he has Cambyses. Okay, Cambyses is right before Darius. Darius, then Xerxes. Okay, this is the Achaemenid Empire at that time. Cambyses gets to Egypt and supposedly loses an entire military force in the deserts between potentially Cairo and Siwa. But there's also stories that Cambyses took his military force all the way down to Sudan. Why?
We're being lied so much.
Yeah.
We have no idea about our history, like no idea.
No.
And you telling the story, it's like, this guy's crazy, right?
Yeah.
This guy is mad. He's out of his mind.
Yeah.
I like how they say that if they lie to us on telling the news, can you imagine how did they lie writing the history books?
Exactly.
You know what's fascinating to me? So what I remember about the school days and the history, I always thought that, and lots of people that are watching right now, they will tell, how can you believe those miracles, right? Those giants, it's not true, it's unnatural. Yeah. But at the same time, I remember distinctly this. When I was a kid and we were taught history, we've been told multiple times that in the ancient Egypt, there were these pharaohs that were what? Half men, half gods. They were like, oh yeah, pharaohs were half men, half god.
Yeah.
So that was normal, right?
Yeah.
But this is a fairy tale. But they were teaching half men, what is that all about?
Well, and it makes even more sense when you look at it from this perspective. So let's go back for a second to say we have the negative angel that was in charge prior to the flood, and he gets put in prison. Then we've got this whole Sodom and Gomorrah thing happen, right? They get put in prison. But look how interesting it is. You ever studied the dynasties in Egypt? How long they usually last?
No.
Less than 6 generations. So I think one of the negative angels realized that if he kept it really small in region, and he kept sleeping with one family, and then that family would die out, right? Because the power, the angelic blood ends up dying out after a few generations, after 6 generations. Next dynasty, negative angel comes, that's the next dynasty. You see what I'm saying? And you can trace it through history and go, whoa, these dynasties are not lasting that long. Why? And I think it's because the power of that negative angel that sleeps with that originates each dynasty, same one. And I think God may have allowed that because it was in a very small area. It wasn't in an area that was massive and taking over. But remember this, let's go back to the fact it's a seed war. The enemy has to somehow poison that. Look where Jesus ends up going right after he's born. He has to flee, and he goes to Egypt as a child.
Yes.
Well, you don't think the enemy was trying to make it so that not only were all the children killed as Jesus is fleeing, right? Herod the Great kills everybody that is showing any teeth. Any babies that don't have teeth, he was killing them. Remember that?
Yes.
It was the slaughter of the innocent. Well, Joseph and Mary, they go into Egypt to survive that.
Yes.
I think that the enemy was trying to make that as the backup plan to kill anything that would have come, but that he didn't have the opportunity at that time. But we don't think like that as believers, right? As believers, we don't think that the enemy is structuring himself to try and end the potential Messiah.